early 2020, before COVID gripped Britain, Kusumpan Joshi is leading a group of volunteers at the British Library to explore how a late 19th century magazine, Vanity Fair, profiled celebrities from Africa and Asia. While surfing the internet, she bumps into Professor Lynn Innes, 12th in the line of descent from Mir Jafar and the great-granddaughter of Nawab Mansur Ali Khan. Lynn's recent book, The Last Prince of Bengal, offers fascinating insights into this period.
Well, the magazine set out to show the vanity of British society, of the elite in British society, including the politicians. And to some extent, it included the visiting celebrities from India and Africa.
Professor John Eade, who has been supervising the project, believes the magazine reflected the political and social aspirations of the British Empire during the late 19th century.
It's a very interesting mixture of the portrayal of famous people and also commentary on them. And the editor, Bowles, wanted to influence the elite, the political and social elite. And he had a very distinct idea of what they should be doing.
The rise of Thomas Gibson Bowles is truly fascinating. Starting his career as a clerk at London's Somerset House, he ventured into publishing Vanity Fair in 1868 with just £200. The magazine didn't succeed until a colour cartoon reproduced through lithography was made part of its weekly fare. The first one of Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli by Italian caricaturist Carlo Pellegrini appeared the next year. There was no looking back. Colour cartoons of politicians, royalty, and other top social and literary figures with accompanying biographies became a regular feature. They gave Vanity Fair a distinct identity and place in history. Kusumpan Joshi's book, Selective Inclusion, African and Asian Celebrities in London's Vanity Fair magazine, takes an in-depth look into the text and subtext of this journal as visualized by Thomas Gibson Bowles.
Selecting the subjects for featuring in the Vanity Fair, I think the editor must have picked these people primarily because of their importance and the interest that they would arouse in the readers. So they were all very important personalities, whether they were from India or from other parts of Asia or from Africa. They were all highly politically important, very mostly very affluent people who had made an important contribution in the society and administration of their country. Or they were emperors and rulers, statesmen. There are some sportsmen as well. There is a barrister. So they're all successful, important people.
Sold for 1 shilling a copy, the magazine hit the stands in London every week for over 46 years. Was it the period of its publication that made it the barometer of English attitudes and fashions?
I think the second half of the 19th century is fascinating from an English-British point of view, really, because the Industrial Revolution was changing society massively, and Bowles was very worried about the development of mass, of the populace, if you like.
Through our book and documentary, we explore whether the inclusion of 28 celebrities from Africa and Asia was based on selective inclusion. Also, did the caricatures and accompanying biographies represent them fairly? Lynn Innes, who has written the foreword of Selective Inclusion, feels the magazine treated African and Asian celebrities differently when compared with their European counterparts.
They portrayed celebrities from India and Africa as being less dignified or less respectable, and perhaps people that one could not take seriously than they did with European and English celebrities.
The first Asian celebrity featured in Vanity Fair was the Nawab Nazim of Bihar, Bengal and Orissa, Mansoor Ali Khan. A descendant of the controversial Mir Jafar, he was among 13 Indians featured between 1870 and 1904. His caricature and biography appeared in April 1870. This was about a year after he had sailed from Murshidabad to Britain to plead his case.
When the East India Company made a contract with Mir Jafar, they promised him a very, very large pension, but each time there was a new Nawab, the East India Company and the British government reduced the pension, often because the new Nawab was very young. And so by the time my great-grandfather became Nawab, it had been reduced to about 1/10 of the promised amount. And this was for him a great grievance.
A former Mughal province, Bengal had broken free and was ruled by the Nawabs of Murshidabad. In 1757, the East India Company's Robert Clive managed to pressure Mir Jafar, commander of the Bengal army, to betray his master Nawab Siraj-ud-Daulah in the Battle of Plassey. This manipulated victory helped Clive to overthrow the Nawab and eventually led to the establishment of the British Raj in India.
One of the first things many of my friends, and they are friends, have said to me, "Oh, Mir Jafar, the person who betrayed India or the person who sold India to the British." So I've always been very aware of that descent, and that Mir Jafar is not somebody to be particularly proud of.
Mansoor Ali Khan was far from pleased to see his cartoon in Vanity Fair.
When he saw the caricature of himself in Vanity Fair, he was extremely upset and very angry, because he felt that it portrayed him as a minor figure. It showed him as a small figure with his dominated by glasses. It emphasized his clothing rather than his respectability, and it contrasted very much with the very regal portraits of him that were back in the palace in Murshidabad.
The second Asian celebrity, Sir Salar Jung, was also visiting Britain when he was featured by Vanity Fair in 1876. As Prime Minister of Hyderabad, he was a guest of the Prince of Wales. On his way to London, he suffered a painful hip injury in Paris. This delayed his onward journey. Upon reaching London, Salar Jung received a warm welcome. He and his entourage were housed in a beautiful residence in Piccadilly Circus. He was presented to Queen Victoria. Unable to move freely, he had to be carried on a couch to see the Houses of Parliament. The Duke of Sutherland invited him to Dunrobin Castle in Scotland. He was honoured by the Lord Mayor of London and was presented a rich casket by the City of London. Salar Jung reciprocated lavishly. He organised a grand party for over 100 guests in Richmond's Star and Garter Hotel. Vanity Fair's caricaturist Leslie Ward Spy writes that he too was one of his guests. "His Indian cook makes finger-licking good curries," he said. Vanity Fair profiled 3 members of a family of Jews from Bombay, the Sassoons. They were Sir Albert Abdullah David Sassoon in 1879, followed by his half-brother Reuben and his son Albert. All 3 had moved to England. The founder of the Sassoon family fortune was David Sassoon. He had fled from Baghdad in 1829 and found refuge in Bombay. Soon the small family business he set up there turned into a mighty international empire. The first to be included in Vanity Fair was Sir Albert Abdullah David Sassoon. Dubbed the Indian Rothschild, he had moved to the UK as a middle-aged man and fitted seamlessly into British life and society.
For Albert, I think the biggest thing that stands out is, yes, it was a full bio. So, you know, where he was born, how he came to be from Bombay to the business side to back coming to England. But when you actually read the detail, the thing that strikes you is very patronising. Patronising in the sense it's, oh, how happy he was with his rulers, i.e. the British in India, you know, so that he was very good at giving things. Oh, how happy he was to make England his home, knowing that this is the rightful home for the chosen. You know, it was all very much like a father sort of saying he's made the right choice, you know, very imperialistic. So each of those lines, it's patronising, it is patronising.
As a jewel in the British crown, India was the land from which Vanity Fair selected the highest number of Asian subjects. But it also chose a few from other Asian countries. 2 celebrities from Thailand were Phaya Bhaskaravanshi and Crown Prince Vajirabad. Bhaskaravanshi was the envoy of King Chulalongkorn. Vajirabad was a visiting student. Vanity Fair Caricatures of Sportsmen was a huge selling point. It is therefore not surprising that it featured a galaxy of Asian royals who were also sportsmen. The first was the Prime Minister of Jodhpur, Sir Pratap Singh, who was also a fearless hunter and a skilled horseman and polo player. Vanity Fair featured him when he was visiting England as a guest to attend Queen Victoria's Jubilee celebrations. He set sail from India on the SS Tasmania. At Suez, Sir Pratap left the ship to travel to London by another route. Soon after his exit, the cruiser hit a rock near Corsica. Sir Pratap's jewellery was recovered from the sea, but the ceremonial clothes he was to wear at the Queen's Jubilee sank without a trace. This created a problem, but Lady Rosebery from the wealthy Rothschild family came to his rescue. She arranged some kimkhab or Indian brocade for him. Soon a London tailor successfully stitched Indian clothes for him. Among them were Jodhpurs or tight knee breeches that began to be worn in the West by horse riders. An interesting story about Sir Pratap's generous disposition is still remembered. When he went to meet Queen Victoria, he felt he must give her a visible token of his loyalty and devotion. Hastily pulling out his sarpesh, a precious bejeweled gold ornament he was wearing on his turban, he had presented it to Her Majesty. In 1897, Vanity Fair chose another truly remarkable Asian sportsman who was also an Indian royal. He was Prince Ranjit Singh Ji. His caricature by Leslie Ward was presented in an upbeat and colourful manner. Ward found it hard to arrange a sitting with him. Finally, he travelled to the Sussex County Cricket Ground at Hove, where he caught him when he was about to start to bat.
Compared to some of the caricatures, it's more like a painting, I think, because the image I get, of course, a lot of it is perspective. So Leslie Ward, spy, who's the portraiture, is looking from below, isn't he? He's looking up to him. Whereas some of them that we see look down on the person or look straight at the person. So he's looking up in a kind of respectful way. And I think Ranji's got a kind of rather distant look. He's focusing, but he's certainly not looking at us. He's looking concentrated perhaps actually Leslie Ward found him hard to get hold of, actually. Ranji wasn't running to kind of meet him, and he certainly wasn't going to his studio, so he caught him as he was going out to bat. So clearly Ranji's mind is on other things. But also I think it fits into this idea of the effortless amateur sportsman, because this is a time when there was a rigid division between the English gentlemen who were playing for fun, as amateurs had their own private funds, they didn't need to play for money, and the professionals. And also it's interesting because he also became a key figure in the Sussex Cricket Club, which, of course, Imran Khan, now President of Pakistan, played for, and the Nawab of Patodi also was captain. So Sussex, where I come from, has these kind of colonial links in a kind of almost kind of bizarre way.
Ranjit Sinhaji retired from cricket in 1920 after scoring almost 25,000 first-class runs. Yet he was more than just a cricket icon. He became the ruler of Navanagar and was the Chancellor of the Indian Chamber of Princes and represented India in the League of Nations.
He is fascinating in so many ways, isn't he? Because he taps into this expanding sporting industry, if you like, that we now see England playing India at the moment. Of course, this is the latest stage of this long relationship that he, in a way, started, really. And what's interesting about him was that he was able to play a whole number of different roles. The role of a prince, to gain control of the principality back in Gujarat. But then he also, through his skill as a sportsman, enters the arena in Britain, in England, and is adored by the fans because he's playing for England against Australia, and he goes to Australia and plays in Australia. So he's part of the whole start of what we now know as cricket as a global game. And of course, he's also interesting because he becomes involved with the daughter of an English clergyman. So he's kind of pushing the boundaries in a whole number of ways.
Another sportsman come royal selected by Vanity Fair in 1900 was Maharaja Rajendra Singh of Patiala. His caricaturist Mary Catherine Rees depicted him as a tall, sickly figure standing on a polo field wearing a huge turban and a ridiculous pair of spectacles.
That caricature was a little bit not to the potential of Maharaja Rajendra Singh. He was such a grand royal, and he was a very good sportsman, and he was very intelligent person and true royal. But the caricature does not represent all that. This looks more like a cartoon, not the true representation of any of his features. He was a very just king. He has done so much for his own people and for the colonial government. But this is not represented in the caricature. In caricature, he is shown like a very, weak, tall person, and the caricature itself is in the polo field, where he's just standing with stick and no horse in the sight. His clothes and all the other surroundings that do not do justice to his personality. That's how I felt.
Fortunately, unlike his portrait, his biography is not a distortion of facts.
It's not too bad, I would say, but as I said, it could have been better. The name, first of all, it says Patiala, caricature name, and it sounds a little bit dehumanizing. They could have said Maharaja Rajendra Singh or something like that. There are a few things, like the first opening statement is 3 lines long, where they mention his dad as well, his father. And then they talk about his clothes. For the turban, they say the elastic band and the trousers. That is a combination of the British and the Indian things. So that is not too bad, but again, it could have been better.
In 1897, Vanity Fair included Sir Mancherji Merwanji Bhavnagre. He was the only Indian barrister featured in its pages. He was exceptional also because he wasn't from any royal family. A graduate from Bombay's Elphinstone College, he studied law at London's Lincoln's Inn and was called to the bar in 1885. He later settled in London. Shocked by the premature death of his sister Avabai, he built memorials in London and India to commemorate her. Bhavnagre was UK's first Indian Conservative Member of Parliament in London. Another celebrity from India who wasn't a royal was Sir Aga Khan. His inclusion in Vanity Fair in 1904 seems linked to his becoming the president of the All India Muslim League that year. He was also the Imam of Ismaili Muslims. Being fabulously rich, he visited Britain and Europe frequently and moved in high social circles. But not every African and Asian featured in Vanity Fair was a visiting celebrity or lived in Britain. The magazine picked many African and Asians due to their news value. Good examples are Arabi Pasha, Ismail Pasha, and Tawfiq Pasha of Egypt. All three were featured because of important political changes in their country. Another similar example was King Katuvayu from South Africa. Dethroned by the British in 1879, Vanity Fair featured him in 1882, soon after he had arrived in London to plead for the restoration of his Zulu kingdom. Yet another African emperor included in Vanity Fair in 1891 due to his newsworthiness was Moulay Hassan. After years of trying to break the isolation of Morocco, European powers were on the verge of making a breakthrough. His Vanity Fair caricature was a distortion of his real personality. His biography was full of innuendos.
Hassan I's caricature in Vanity Fair was almost a misrepresentation. He was a very majestic emperor. He was 6'3" tall, but he was shown and portrayed sitting down with his legs folded, and you cannot see his personality in the caricature. Whereas when you see the other pictures of Hassan I as an emperor, where he has been taking a tour of the state, where he's sitting on his horse cart, or whether he's taking a tour or he's taking a session in his court, he was a majestic man. But unlike his actual personality, he was shown as an emperor sitting with his legs folded and attending a session in the court, and all the grandeur was not represented in the caricature. Vanity Fair's biography on Hassan I was a 50-50 representation of his personality, where he was a very proud ruler and he was respected by his people. The biography insulted him as a harm-tamed barbaric who has now came into power. It was a very, very controversial biography, but of course, at that time, it was acceptable.
But the most important African ruler featured by Vanity Fair, because he was hitting news headlines, was undoubtedly Emperor Menelik II of Ethiopia. He was featured in 1897 because he had recently won the famous Battle of Adwa against Italy. A British diplomatic mission under Sir Reynold Rod had also visited his capital. It was soon after this visit that Vanity Fair covered Emperor Menelik.
Here we have the caricature of Emperor Menelik of Ethiopia that appeared on the 29th of July 1897. His caricature contrasts sharply with his biographical details because in his caricature he has been shown looking like a real cute kind of a chubby person sitting, smiling with a very naive smile on his face, grinning, showing his teeth and his red lips. So this contrasts sharply with what he really was. Menelik was a towering personality. He was a very tall person. He had a grand personality. He was an emperor after all.
Another Ethiopian celebrity profiled a few years after Menelik II was his cousin, Ras Makonnen. This was in 1903. Ras Makonnen had figured in the news since his outstanding contribution to Ethiopia's victory against Italy. Moreover, 1903 was the year he was visiting London as an official guest for the coronation of King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra. Some years before Ras Makonnen, Vanity Fair had profiled Emperor Gojong of Korea in 1899. This was because he was in the news since the mid-1890s. How did Vanity Fair treat Emperor Gojong?
Well, the caricature of Emperor Gojong, it is not a true representation of how he really looked. It clearly was drawn with the intention of ridiculing him and creating this narrative that was quite derogatory, that lacked empathy, that was intended to put him down. Because if you compare his caricature with the photos of him, in the caricature he's depicted as being quite small and diminutive. His clothes are oversized. He's depicted in such a way to look quite weak and almost cowardly. And even the tablecloth that his hands are on and the background, the wall, it doesn't depict like the grandeur of where he would have stayed. It looks very shabby and very beggarly. So clearly it was created with the intention of ridiculing him and putting him down. Because even if you look at the text of the caricature, it says that. It says something along the lines of he suddenly improved himself into an emperor, that he suddenly made himself an emperor, and in token of this he wears yellow silk garments and with some cheap Brahmajam tablecloth. And they also said in the text of that he lives in a warren hard by the European legation, so that he could bolt into one of them should the occasion arise. Like I said, it was clearly created to ridicule and put him down.
Another Asian personality featured in Vanity Fair was Sultan Abu Bakr of Johor. The Sultan visited the UK regularly. During one of his trips, he had become attached to a young woman, Jenny Miguel, in Brighton. He hid his real identity from her and promised to marry her. Later, when she came to know that he had duped her, she tried to sue him. But as the British government washed their hands off the case, the Sultan managed to get away scot-free.
The Sultan of Johor was one of the very few caricatures that we've covered in this project that, in the image itself, was portrayed fairly. There were a few, I'd say, jabs taken in the write-up, but the caricature itself is a true representation of his person. In the portrait, he looks like a strong man. His features are as they were in his photos. The actual portrait that was taken, or that was drawn, was a copy of a stamp that had his face on it, so it was a well-known portrait as well. In the write-up itself, there were a few things that were said, for example, that he admires Western women, or that he was a Just that he was lavish and had a grand way of living.
Vanity Fair also profiled 4 celebrities from the Far East. All were diplomatic representatives based temporarily in Britain. Only one, Tadasu Hayashi, was from Japan. The remaining 3 were from China.
Vanity Fair featured 3 Chinese celebrities between 1868 and 1914. The first one was Ko Sung Tao, who was the first Chinese ambassador to the UK. He has been depicted very positively. If you compare his image with his caricature in Vanity Fair, it is quite similar to it. And he's smiling and sitting there very comfortably. And his biography is also quite complete and quite fair to him. The same can be said about Chang Ta-jen, whose Vanity Fair caricature appeared in 1903. But the way the third Chinese character, he was another famous person from China who also played an important role in the politics of his country as well as in the political relations, diplomatic relations between China and Britain. He was here in 1896. Li Hung Chang was extremely tall. If you look at this picture of him in the UK, he's going around with some important dignitaries in this country. He had a very good personality. He was very tall and imposing. But if you look at his caricature, it's such a diminutive little figure.
Maharaja Nripendra Narayan Bhoop Bahadur of Cooch Behar, featured in Vanity Fair in 1901, was a showpiece of the positive impact of the British Raj. The British had taken charge of his training and education from his infancy. To make sure he would be a progressive ruler, they settled his marriage in 1878. The girl they selected for him was not a princess. She was Suniti Devi, an educated girl who was the daughter of Keshab Chandra Sen, a Bengali educationist and social reformer. As rulers, they introduced progressive reforms to benefit their people. They were both at Bexhill-on-Sea when the Maharaja passed away in 1911. He was the first Indian royal to be cremated at London's Golders Green Cemetery. Another Indian ruler flashed by Vanity Fair in 1901 was Maharaja Sayaji Rao III of Baroda. As his managers during his minority, the British had supervised his upbringing and education. After his marriage, it pleased them to see him and his wife Chimnabai II modernizing their kingdom of Baroda. The Maharaja promoted education, introduced reforms, beautified Baroda, and established the Bank of Baroda and Baroda College. He patronized Indian artists and Indian classical music. He financed the higher education of promising Indian students like Bhimrao Ambedkar and employed young Indians educated in England such as Aurobindo Ghosh and Satyavrat Mukherjee. Prominent nationalist Dadabhai Naoroji was one of his ministers. During the Round Table Conference in 1931, he sponsored a program of classical Indian dances by Menaka Roy at Dorchester Hotel. He had good relations with the British but was never a British stooge. In 1911, he annoyed some British officers by appearing to have broken the rules of etiquette that were imposed on Indian rulers. We now move to a Vanity Fair celebrity who is a household name in India and abroad. He is undoubtedly Maharaja Dilip Singh of Kohinoor fame. Featured in 1882, he was the only Indian royal in Vanity Fair who was stripped of his kingdom, uprooted from his family, and was transplanted on British soil while still in his teens. Queen Victoria was his godmother. But by the 1880s, he had fallen from official grace and his relations with the British were strained.
Well, Maharaja Dalip Singh of the Punjab was featured in Vanity Fair in November 1882. And from the caricature, it appears that it was quite true to what he had really become by now. He had arrived as a very young and handsome, dashing prince. But by 1882, he had turned into quite a obese, middle-aged person with a receding hairline and quite a big paunch. And so it was quite true to his real life image. But what is not really complimentary is his biographical details. Vanity Fair has firstly not given various details about Maharaja Dalip Singh, about his life and his background. They haven't even mentioned the Kohinoor, for which he is even today very deeply connected. And there is also some wrong information. For instance, it has been said that he had converted to Christianity after coming to England. This was not the case. He had converted to the Christian faith. He had given up his Sikh religion even before coming to England as a young lad of about 15.
Is it far-fetched to conclude that African and Asian celebrities were deliberately misrepresented? Is there some truth that their accompanying bios were far from perfect?
I do not think that the way the caricatures were made or the portraits were made had any racist intention or inspiration. But perhaps the biographies that went with them sometimes smack of an element of racism, which was perhaps part of the mental makeup of many of the people during those times.
More than a century after Vanity Fair ceased publication in 1914, the question is, are the secrets of the rulers, statesmen and elite of the era and the machinations of the British Empire that lie hidden in its pages still relevant?
I think it's very important that people in Britain particularly, but also people outside Britain, realize that it wasn't just English people that made the history of Britain, and that they need to be aware of the many distinguished people who came from India and Africa and Malaysia and other parts of the world to Britain in the 19th century, and also that attitudes towards them were very mixed. They weren't completely sympathetic, and they weren't completely racist either. And so people do need to know much more about the history of England in relation to other countries.
It is now more than a century since Vanity Fair stopped production. Is it possible that the shades of its founder, editor Bowles, and his team are still around, listening and watching? If they are, it must surely tickle their vanity that their writings and caricatures are still being dug out, scrutinized, and discussed.
Okay, can you guys see my screen? Okay.
We'll read the screen. I think we can see this image of, and underneath it said statue of Lalit Singh on Button Island, Thetford. Just checking if that's what you want to be displayed. Is that the case?
Now it's Maharaja's Dalip Singh, his birth date. Can you see that? The presentation. No.
No, I not. I think what I can see is yeah, maybe you clicked on the wrong window when you press share screen. No worries, take your time.
How about now?
Yes, I can see. Yeah, I can see Maharaja Sir Dalip Singh. 4th of September 1838 to 22nd of October, and the image of him in the caricature. No, please go ahead.
Right.
encyclopedia of the Smileys.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
So my focus today is Sir Sultan Muhammad Shah Aga Khan, the third Aga Khan, who was born in 1877, died on the 11th July 1957. Let's look at the image that featured in the magazine Vanity Fair. Interestingly, this was just after his birthday. His birthday is early November, and it's the 2nd November that he was born on, and it was the week of his birthday that Vanity Fair, and I was looking at Kusum and Lalit Joshi's unpublished work, and it very interestingly highlights something. There is only a very slight exaggeration of his looks, and that's a very, very good observation, because I came across this image from the National Portrait Gallery, and it seems that the caricature